I am Dr. Jagtej Kaur Gareva, Assistant Professor, Department of Art History and Visual Arts. This module examines the modern art movement in South India and the influences that shaped it, the role of the art school in Madras, and the contribution of individual artists such as Caseus Punica is examined. The seminal role of the Progressive Painters Association and the Cholamandalam Artists Village and Work Centre in engendering an independent and individualist approach are examined. We will initially look at art in Chennai in the 18th and early 19th centuries. The painting tradition in Madras from the 18th to the 19th century, before opening of the Madras Art School in the Southern Presidency, was mainly limited to royal portraits. Utilitarian artworks and religious icons. Royal portraits were mainly done by artists of the Tanjore school, local and court artists of Pudukkottai, Raja Ravi Verma and F.C. Lewis, to name a few. Some of the artists like Govindaswamy Maistri and Ramaswamy Maistri from Tanjore, unlike other traditional Indian artists, also signed their works. Tanjore painters used rich, luminous colors for these portraits. Their works had minutely painted embroidery, jewelry, background and other such details. However, not much attention was given to the physical likeness of the person. Another artist who signed his works was Venkatarayalu Raju, who also used watercolors as his medium. He was the court painter of the princely state of Pudukkottai and had studied art under E.B. Havel in the Madras School of Art. He, later in 1886, also taught the ruler of Pudukkottai. His work, even in oils, retains the brilliance of the color palette of Tanjore painters. Raja Ravi Verma and F.C. Lewis followed the academic realistic style in their portrait and were careful regarding likeness, perspective and proportions in their works. Unlike the traditional artists, in their portraits, the form and features of the person dominated the picture space, and the background was painted in such a manner that the main subject became the focus of the painting. Now we'll briefly look at the art school at Madras. The British government in India planned to open schools of art in the subcontinent due to the growing demand of Indian handicrafts in Europe. Their main aim was to promote industrial crafts. However, eventually, the academic style of painting also became an important part of the curriculum. The surgeon, Dr. Alexander Hunter, founded two separate schools in Madras, one for fine arts and the other for industry in 1850 and 1851 respectively. These schools were soon combined, and in 1852 the same was taken over by the government and named Government School of Industrial Arts. Dr. Hunter ran this institution until 1870. E.B. Havel joined as superintendent in 1884 and stayed on that post till 1894. Eventually, the institution was named the Government College of Fine Arts. Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary, a well-known artist of his times, became the vice principal of the school in 1928 and went on to become the first Indian principal of the art school in 1929. A pupil of Abhinandannath Tagore, He followed his teacher's style of painting for a while, but as he moved towards sculpture, and especially after getting training in Italy, the influence of Western art became visible in his work. His style was a synthesis of Western and Indian sensibilities. When he became the principal, he ran the school with strict discipline and laid emphasis on the Western style of art. He was awarded the civil honor, the Padma Bhushan, in 1957 and retired in 1958, but his influence in the art world continued. After his retirement, Caseus Punica became the principal of this school. We'll briefly now look at the formation of artist groups. Meanwhile, in the early 20th century in India, the nationalist sentiment had come to dominate most aspects of life. As part of the Swadeshi movement, artists had been involved in revivalism of Indian art by turning for inspiration to the artistic traditions of the past. The themes were taken from Indian history, myths, epics and literature, and the works were lyrical and idealistic. In the 1940s, two events shook the moorings of society. One, the man-made catastrophe of the Bengal famine, and the other, the Second World War. Both these events reverberated in the psyche of the artists, and they felt compelled to question the established norms. In Bengal, some young artists felt the need to break away from the practice of established norms of art, both revivalism and academic realism, which they believed had failed to express the true sufferings of the people. In the quest for regeneration of art and the formulation of a new, modern visual language, in 1943, the Calcutta group was formed by a group of artists led by Pradosh Das Gupta. This was the beginning of artists with a similar ideology coming together. In Madras, the formation of the Progressive Painters Association was initiated by Caseus Punica. In 1944, this was the second such group in the country. This group also aimed to synthesize Western and Indian artistic traditions and initiate a modernist approach. Punica had joined the art school at Madras as a student in 1936 and completed his training as an artist in 1940. He later became a teacher there and eventually the principal in 1958, a position he held for 10 years. Now we'll briefly look at Punica's contribution to the Madras art movement. During his student and teacher days in the Madras School of Art, Punica participated in various exhibitions in the city as well as outside in Delhi, during which he was exposed to different ideas and influences. In 1944, along with his students and artist friends, Punica decided to form the Progressive Painters Association as he felt a need for a new approach in the evolution of modern Indian art. Progressive Painters Association is the oldest such organization which is still functional. The association played an important role in the art activities in Chennai in the 1960s and 70s and helped nurture the Madras art movement. The association, which was dormant for a few years, was again revived around 2009, coinciding with the inauguration of the Cholamandalam Center for Contemporary Art in 2009. Punica was a visionary artist who expressed that art should be Indian in spirit and worldwide contemporary. He, along with encouraging new developments in art, was also concerned with the problems faced by the artists, especially issues related to livelihood. Due to monetary need, Many artists, he noticed, were unable to dedicate their full time towards their work. To tackle this problem, he and his fellow artists envisioned an artist's village where artists would reside, work and be self-dependent by selling creative handicrafts. Hence, the seed of the Cholamandalam Artists Village was sown in the year 1964. It was felt that economic independence was essential and that income from paintings and sculptures could be supplemented through selling craft objects. So it was decided that the artists would work on handicrafts for 2 or 3 hours a day, and rest of the time would be constructively spent in painting and sculpting. Regarding this, Punica wrote, "Since Indian handicrafts have not only a great traditional background but also an immense export market and home consumption, it would be unwise of the creative artist in India not to explore their possibilities as a better means of living than those afforded by whole-time employment in uncongenial occupations." An association was created called the Artists Handicrafts Association to promote the idea. The first handicrafts that were created for selling mainly consisted of batik work on silk and cotton dress material and leather work. Soon ceramics, woodwork, metalwork, enameling, jewelry and designer furniture were also made. Within a few months, they were able to export their handicrafts to Italy, which were worth about 10,000 Indian rupees at that time. After deducting the price of the raw material and the 10% of the artist's charges from the profit, the association kept the rest for the general fund of the association. The enthusiastic artists of the Progressive Painters Association also started a quarterly journal called Art Trends in 1961. In this journal, not only the art of local artists was discussed, but the work and styles of other modern artists from around the country were also written about. Articles were invited from critics and writers like Richard Bartholomew, Joseph James, Sunanda and others. Punica himself also wrote for the publication. This became a medium of exchange of knowledge and ideas and kept artists around the country updated with the workings of their contemporaries in different parts of India. Today, Art Trends is a rich archive of the Madras art movement. Now we'll briefly look at the Cholamandalam Artists Village and Work Centre. On the 13th of April 1966, finally, on around 8 acres of unused land, the village was established 12 miles from Chennai. The land for the village was bought by the artists themselves with their saved money. Around 40 artists contributed towards it with the money they had earned as commissions and through the sale of their work. A coastal village, Cholamandalam, is close to a village called Injambakkam on the road to Mahabalipuram, now known as the East Coast Road. It was not easy to live in the village due to lack of resources and general hardships that are faced by people living in rural areas. But the artists were determined to make it a success and they were able to achieve it with their hard work. Here artists pooled in their resources and talent to produce artworks and creative handicrafts which could be sold in a permanent exhibition on the premises, providing artists with a permanent enclave and a self-support system. Punica ensured creative freedom for residing artists. Punica states that over 40 artists were allotted residential plots in the newly formed village. The village was named Cholamandalam Artists' Village and Work Centre. Soon many artists shifted with their families to the village. Artists were free to sell their works as they pleased, and they were also free to own private studios in the village. This freedom encouraged artists to not only concentrate on their work, but as they lived together, frequent discussions among them helped and motivated them to explore new possibilities. Guest artists, both from India and overseas, were invited, and separate cottages were built for their stay. This also helped in a wider exchange of ideas. As time passed, many artists of the village held exhibitions in Chennai. They also went on to hold exhibitions at the international level. Common studios for sculpting, painting and graphics helped artists to conveniently create art. Punica observed that although it was difficult to find buyers for paintings and sculptures, but utilitarian handicrafts creatively made by the artists of the village had many takers. He saw it as an opportunity to educate people in aesthetics, especially building their taste and educating them regarding modern art. This desire to bridge the gulf between artists and common people was something they shared with other artist groups of the time. Punica also planned art education for young art students based on an apprenticeship model in which the student would choose a master and work under his supervision for 2 years, and if so desired, he could choose another teacher and work under him for 3 years. The student, apart from his subject, was to study at least 2 crafts. The village also now has a permanent gallery where sculptures and paintings are put on display. An open-air theatre was also built later on. This artists' enclave continues to have visitors even to this day, though the membership is now closed, and Punica's son S. Nandgopal is the secretary of the association. Now we'll briefly look at a few artists who were associated with this entire movement. Caseus Punica. He was born on 31st May 1911 in Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. Since childhood, Punica was interested in art and started taking lessons at the early age of 12. As a child, he was interested in painting landscapes, and this interest continued to his early years as a painter too. His childhood was spent in Kerala, where he found himself surrounded by greenery. This reflects in his early works. He mainly painted landscapes between the 1930s and 40s. About Punica's landscapes, Joseph James writes, "The delight he took in it comes up in the play of his line later on, and sometimes in the almost trembling color. And to both these, the impulsive washes in these watercolors have been first joys and antecedents." His watercolor landscapes were memories of his childhood, which was surrounded by the life of the working class in Kerala. His watercolor landscapes were memories of his childhood, which was surrounded by the life of the ordinary people of Kerala, painted in an adaptation of a somewhat impressionistic style. People, especially rural folk, started featuring in his landscapes, and his paintings show emotive qualities. He painted fishermen, boat jetties, market scenes, and other such scenes. His themes can be seen. One such work can be seen in the landscape titled "Figures on a Quayside." In this painting, he has used watercolors in quick washes, and the painting has a fresh, impressionistic feel to it. He writes, "I began to draw the pictures of villages and coconut groves with which I was familiar with in Kerala. The sight of canals was highly inspiring, and it made me highly emotional. He efficiently synthesized Western technique with Indian and personal subject matter in his landscapes. But his quest did not end here, and his experiments and exploration continued. He gradually started painting in oils as well, and he moved on to other subjects, though landscape continued to be part of his paintings. He liked to use bright colors in his landscapes, like the one he was used to seeing around him during his growing up years in Kerala. About his use of color, M. Anantanarayan writes that although he selected a small band of spectrum, he was able to create a symphony with it. He generally preferred, especially during the later period of his paintings, colors in their pure form like red, yellow and blue. 1950s and 60s for Punica was a time of experimenting with human forms. During this period, his figures show influence of Ajanta and Kerala murals, although his themes mainly centered around rural life and rural folk. Punica was open to influences from any source, be it Western or Indian. He observed technique, vision and essence of the Western tradition and adopted it in his paintings. However, his encounter with Western art actually made him long for the spirit of Indian sculptures of Khajuraho, Mahabalipuram and Konark. Subramaniam explains, his Western excursion affected him like it affected most Indian artists or any artist of individuality. It threw him back on himself. It was as if across the seas, a strange longing for his land caught him in the pit of his stomach. On his return, he became committed indigene, though not in a traditionalist sense. In Panica's Garden series, we can see a distinctively personal style in which he, as described by Pranab Ranjan Ray, had a strong undercurrent of design integrated by linear rhythm. Punica did not attempt to form a pattern of forms in these series of paintings. He slowly made his color palette restricted to two colors in an attempt to move away from the practice of Western modern artists. Hence, we see color harmony in his works, which are sometimes almost monochromatic. This can be seen in some of his works in which he reduced his color scheme, such as this. In the 60s, he had also developed an interest in calligraphy and inscribed symbols freely in a painting. He started painting words and symbols as he reached the conclusion that there is a primitive instinct in humans to draw marks. These marks may not be of any written language, but may be symbols for some animals or just a concept. A good example of this is his painting Words and Symbols, painted in the 1970s. This realization made him move away from the Western modernistic approach and develop his distinctive style, which was in tune with abstract expressionism. Incidentally, J. Swaminathan too was approaching a similar concept, but in both cases it was an individual realization. Punica not only realized the primitive instincts of symbolism and its magical quality, but he also saw the rhythm in the symbols by which calligraphy can be formed into design. While he was still conceptualizing his new findings, he came across some traditional horoscope scrolls in which he observed calligraphic writing juxtaposed with geometrically shaped symbols. He saw in them quality of aesthetic designing and representation in abstract. Henceforth, for 13 years, he worked on his concept of interpreting life, world through symbols. Ray writes, Punica's close reading of thoughts behind Indian visual culture and not just the paramparas of the high arts of the mainstream, that was perhaps responsible for the ideas which led to the paintings of the Words and Symbols series. Punica's abstract art was an original concept born out of his deep contemplation and observation. It was not an outcome of mindless following of the Western artists, but a result of an indigenous thought process with a universal appeal. Punica passed away in 1977 in Chennai, leaving behind a rich legacy. Another artist we'll briefly look at who was associated with the movement and the village is J. Sultan Ali. J. Sultan Ali was born in 1920 in Mumbai. He shifted to Chennai and attained his art education from the government art school there. He passed out of the school in 1945. Being a student of D.P. Roy Chaudhary, Ali was trained in both Indian and Western artistic traditions. In his earlier paintings, we can see the influence of both these traditions. After passing out from the college, he did a course from the Madras Textile Institute in textile designing and a diploma in photography from London. He briefly taught in the Government College of Art in Madras before joining the Rishi Valley School in Madnapalli, where he taught for 6 years. As a teacher in the school, he was exposed to the simple but sharp in appeal forms drawn and painted by children. This influenced his painting as he could relate child art with similar elements of natural instinct and spontaneity found in folk art. The original imagination of children became a major inspiration for his paintings, as he saw children seldom copy any object. His interest in tribal art led to his frequent visits to Bastar, and sometimes living with the Gonda tribes there, he was able to observe their art in detail. He realized that in the Indian tradition, connecting with nature is important, as an Indian artist first experiences nature and draws it with his imagination based on his experience. However, in the Western tradition, direct imitation of nature is achieved by following a set of rules. He found the experience part missing in the Western artistic process. Gradually, he was drawn towards the Indian tradition and tried to weed out the Western tradition that he had learned as a student in the art school. As the exhibition officer of Central Lalit Kala Academy, Ali also saw works of his contemporary artists. This helped him to discover his personal style, which was derived from the symbols adapted from tribal culture and the essence of simplicity taken from child art. He also read works of the anthropologist Elvin Verrier on tribal life. He used symbols adopted from tribal culture such as a bull, snake, king, birds, demons, gods, etc. with fresh, strong and pure colors in his paintings. Some of his paintings on themes of gods and goddesses show the symbolism as seen in his work Durga, where he is shown the beast drawn in the tribal idiom. After retiring from the hectic life of a Lalit Kala Academy official, Ali decided to stay in the Cholamandalam artists' village with Punica. There he further contemplated on his art and realized that he need not distract the effect of symbols by using strong colors in his paintings. So he started painting in tones of black and white. This can be seen in many of his paintings like Vichitra Panchi, made in 1974. In this painting, Ali has drawn a demonic bird with its wings spread across the canvas and four fearful human figures about to be engulfed in its embrace. Ali later on also left the use of oil colors and came back to the medium of watercolors. Some other artists of the Cholamandalam artist village, many other artists were part of this Madras art movement and the artist village. Srinivasan is one of them, who was influenced by the folk and traditional forms following the footsteps of Jamini Roy. He took his inspiration from Tamil Nadu and Andhra's native toys of Kondanpalli, floral patterns of Kalmakari on cloth, the rounded sculptural forms of halibut temples and murals of Lepakshi. Although he was a student of D.P. Roy Chaudhary, his style is individualistic, derived from the rural surroundings of the district Chittoor. The figures in his paintings are robust with spiritual faces and big eyes. S. Paramasivam, Anila Jacob, V. Arnavaz, M. V. Devan, K. S. Gopal, P. Gopinath, K. R. Hari, K. V. Haridasan, S. P. Jayakumar and K. Jayapal are some of the artists among many others from this movement and the artists' village.